Anyhow, he worked on the coast. After he came out of the dockyard. Here's that one from the Lillooet. Here. That's 1928. I know he worked on the Lillooet for, see, that was seasonal. Lillooet, that was 1921. And then in after he was finished up with the Lillooet, he went to work for the Malahat Logging Company, running that donkey boiler on the Cowichan Flats at a place called Charter Siding, which is still there. It's a railway siding on the E&N. No, it would be a siding on the CN line between Cowichan Lake and Duncan, or tie-up, which is non-existent. And we wound up doing all those neat things with the fishing and hunting grouse with the bows and arrows, and anyhow, it was a real, thanks Frank. And then we had a storm. And you got to remember, there was trees that made those look like saplings all around the cabin, or the shack. The road was about wide enough for one vehicle to get through, and we were just off the road a little bit. And it started to blow one night. And of course, Uncle Ernie and I are fast asleep. It was a one-room shack with a curtain for for privacy in the bedroom. Like one end was divided in two, not unlike the Leechtown shack. And the kitchen and the stove was up front and what have you, and so on. And we woke up. Nan woke us up. Come on, you got to get dressed. We're going up to the coal bunker. It was blowing so hard. Oh God, the pine. I'm not exaggerating, one iota, and I can remember this just like it was yesterday. The pine cones off the fir trees were hitting the roof of the shack, just like as if it was hail. And you'd hear a crash, a bump. And Uncle Ernie is sitting on the edge of the bed getting his boots on. And there was a bloody crash. And it bounced him right off the edge of the bed onto the floor. And anyhow, my mother and father or mom and dad were my dad figured the safest place was up under the coal bunker because it was constructed up. You know what a grizzly is? Mm-hmm. Well, it was all timbered, and they had a big coal bunker, and they used to load the logging trains with the coal out of it. But anyhow, it was isolated, and it was clear of the bush. These trees are like this, all around the shack. Anyhow, we didn't go. We waited at daylight. My mom and dad went out of the cabin, and I remember Nan coming back. She was crying like crazy. The shack was like that. Kitchen area was here, and that area there was divided into a couple of double beds. When we got out in the morning, there was a a crew of loggers coming down from Cowichan Lake. They were clearing the road. And they were doing it, they had to cut the road with crosscut. I cut the trees out. It was just like this. It was just like matchsticks. I mean, not that bad. But to give you an idea, this was just very shortly after daylight. And we were about halfway between Cowichan Lake and Duncan. And they arrived there very shortly after daylight. And they had this, the stage used to run back and forth from Duncan to Cowichan Lake. And we wound up getting into the stage. But first off, I've got to go backwards again. Went out of the cabin. And there's a tree. And I'm not kidding it. Your grandfather had to lift me over it. And it was that close to the corner of the cabin. If it had been another 1.5 feet, it would have wiped the whole damn thing right out. Anyhow, we wound up getting into the stage with a guy that had a log had rolled on his leg right outside the cabin. I remember Nan coming in and tearing up sheets to splint his leg. And we rode with him into Duncan. We arrived in Duncan about in just a very short time before the train went south. We got the train to Victoria. So it took us practically all day to get to Victoria with them having to clear the road. They had to buck them off both ends and roll them out of the way. I remember this guy. He was a great, big, burly guy. And he gave Uncle Ernie and I an apple. It was just one apple. The damn thing was it seemed to us anyhow, never seen an apple like it. But anyhow, we wound up in Victoria. And we went up there, it must have been in 1922. And that's an experience. Would you like to hear about that? Mm-hmm. Where your grandfather has got himself a shore job, which was all he ever wanted in his life. Because he told me, he said, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" This is when I was a teenager. I said, "I'm going to go get a job on the boats." He said, "If I catch you anywhere near a bloody boat," he said, "I'll shoot you." Anyhow, he gets this shore job and goes to Cowichan Lake. So now we're going to Cowichan Lake. We're living on Johnson Street in Victoria, right behind where the old telephone office was. It's the exchange. It's an exchange now. It used to be the main building, the telephone office, or the telephone, BC Tel here, or in Victoria. And Nan had a friend by the name of Walton. So we're going up to Cowichan Lake. So he's going to take us up there. He's got a Model T Touring. And we're loaded. Beds and whatever, anything we could get in it, and all the that trunk that Jennifer has, and the beds and everything, all stacked up in the back of this Model T Ford. And Nan and Uncle Ernie, or Nan and Uncle Ernie and this Walton guy are in the front seat. The back seat is full of everything. I'm sitting up, the hood's down, granted, because they got to get all this stuff in. I'm sitting up on top of the furniture. And we head for Victoria, and you have to understand, you know what the Malahat's like now? Well, it was that plus, no, well, it was just a dirt road. It was so bad, so narrow, that the only way that you could you could pass a car on the Malahat at that time, this is 1921, 22, the car on the inside, if it was lucky, had to run its nose up on the bank to let the car on the outside go by. And between Victoria, in those days, you used to have to go up the Malahat, up Cousins Hill, through the Shawnigan Lake Cutoff, round Cowichan Station, down through the Black Bridge or the Silver Bridge, not the highway bridge now, but the one that's down by the reserve.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, we up the river.
Almost the way the bus goes.
Pardon?
Almost the way the bus
That's
goes.
probably does, because the bus follows the old route.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's the way we went. And between the time we left Victoria, which was, as I remember, I'm going on 5, going on 6 now. No, 5. I was 5 then. I started school when I was 5. And between the Victoria and arriving in the middle of the night, I mean it was black, cold black when we arrived at the shack on the Cowichan Lake Road, he'd repaired 5 blowouts. And I remember him helping Dad and Mom unload the truck and turn around and headed right back. Anyhow, that was our trip to Cowichan Lake, and then of course we got chased out with a storm. We came back to Victoria and we went to live in James Bay. So your dad's, or your grandfather, is now, he always looked for a shore job. He hated going to sea. And got a job at Lemon Gunnison Mill in Victoria, which is where Ocean Cement is in Victoria. The mill was there. It was called Lemon Gunnison. He's a couple of days on the job, and he dropped a 12 by 12, or they dropped a 12 by 12 on his foot, and he smashed up his foot. He wound up in the hospital on crutches for a couple of years. Well, a couple of months, I guess. And then he went to work. That would be probably, but that was the Christmas of 1923 was when we moved into James Bay. And so he went to work at the mill, and he got hurt, and he was off most of the rest of the year, I guess. He wound up going back, and he went to work in the CPR at he went on the no, wait a minute, 24, let's say 24, 25. No, he didn't. He went to work in the mill, and then when he got through that, he went to work on a boat a ship called the Stadacona, which was a converted sailing ship. It had an auxiliary steam engine. And they used to run, it was a rum runner. They loaded booze out of bond at the end of Ogden Point Dock. That's where the bonding warehouse was then. And Mexico was wet, but the States they had prohibition. This is in the early 20s. This would be 24, I imagine 2024. And then he went to on the rum road. Anyhow, they loaded up the booze and cleared here because they had to give their port of their destination. They'd clear for Mexico. But they would go down the coast and lay off San Diego. And the Elliot Ness, the G, not the G men, but the bootleggers on and the would in the States would send out these fast boats, and they'd load it up with booze. But going backwards again, while they were going down the coast, the crew would unload the booze out of the cases, and they would load it into sacks, and they'd stitch up because they were easier to handle. And your grandfather used to say when they were going through this process, going down the coast, as far as you could see astern was empty whiskey cases. So then they'd go down, and that in those days it was a 3-mile limit. So they'd lay off 3 miles. And of course, if the weather got bad and they couldn't get the small boats couldn't get out, they'd start to sneak in below the 3-mile limit. And the Coast Guard, the revenue cutters used to patrol the coast. And he said more than once they'd fire a shot over a bow. And then he wound up getting hurt. He wasn't a drinking man. He'd take a drink, but that was all. And he never, in all the time that I know him, he'd have a drink on occasion, but he never drank to excess. Well, the story goes this way. The crew, of course, the booze was there on the ship, and of course the crew would drink. You know, I imagine they were restricted, but they had a drink. This day they're egging your grandfather on to take a drink, and of course he did. The bottle's empty now, so he went to pitch it out of a porthole, and the ship rolled, and it smashed on the porthole, and he fell on it, and he lacerated all his wrist. So he wound up with a tourniquet. In fact, all his wrist, his right wrist, was all scar tissue. And these 2 fingers, when they find, well, anyhow, it turns out he was about 24 hours in his bunk with his arm strung up with a tourniquet on it, waiting for one of the shore boats to get out so he could get him ashore to a hospital. And the way he put it was, said he went ashore to San Diego on a load of whiskey. He said when we arrived in San Diego, said the people down on the receiving end were down there unloading the whiskey, along with the mayor's limousine and the chief police limousine. They were getting their cut, so on. So he wound up in hospital, and now he's an alien, so he's in the country illegally. Now he stayed with the people on the receiving end down there, the way he put it. And their name was Dylan. They were a Greek family. And the way he put it, he said, as a family, he lived with them for pretty near 6 months, waiting to get back on the ship to get home, because he couldn't go any other way. He said, they, as a family group, he said, there was none better. They were very close, very nice family situation. But he said, as far as principles are concerned, they had none. He said, they just as soon as shoot you as look at you. So he wound up getting doctored up in San Diego with some doctor. And he stayed with them until he could get back again. Finally got back. But he never did have the use of these 2 fingers. And the only time he ever whacked me, he used to say, I'd never hit my kids only in self-defense. The only time he whacked, these were just skin and bone. I grabbed the chair to put it to the table, which we're having supper, and your Uncle Ernie was just about to sit down on it. And he took one look at me and he went, wow! Christ, but then I felt that, I can feel it now. But anyhow, he wasn't a violent man. And so now he's back home from the rum runners. And that's when, by now, he's on the Louise. And that's the first boat I ever remember going on. You used to get a pass if you worked with a CPR, and you could go on these for free. So Nan and Uncle Ernie and I went to Vancouver on the Louise, stayed on the boat overnight and all those sorts of things. And went down to the dining room. For breakfast and embarrassed the daylights out of your Nan. Because, in those days it was white linen tablecloth and a waiter hovering over you with a napkin draped over his arm, So we got the real royal treatment. But Uncle Ernie was only, of course, Uncle Ernie was only probably 5 or 6. They had breakfast. We had cornflakes for breakfast. I remember that much. And never had you can't throw them up on your spoon with your thumb when you're in public. I was embarrassed as hell myself. We'd never eaten out in our lives before. And so the waiter came around with a bowl of fruit. And of course, I, so embarrassed and shy, I said no. Uncle Ernie grabbed got a banana, peeled the banana, he went. Man was so damn embarrassed, you could have crawled into the woodwork. But anyhow, that was that. And then, after a couple of years with a CPR and one thing and another, he went to work. About 1920. Let's see, that would be in 1926. He was in, let's see where I am. I told you about the whaler, of course. And, here we are here. That's the Lilith was 21, the Louise was 20, that was 26, that's 26. But in the interim, that was when we were living in Victoria then. That's a 25 for the Louise, no, the Kathleen, and a 25 for the Louise. Well, yeah, that would just about cover it from the Cowichan Lake area through the mill and the Stadacona. That would bring them to about 25. Well, anyhow, we wound up getting out of the CPR, and he went, because you have to remember that the job was 365 days a year. Well, not 365. They came in. They tied up for approximately 2 weeks, once a year, to blow the boilers, clean the boilers out, punch the tubes in the boilers, and that was the only time that your grandfather was able to get home on a 4 to or an 8 to 5 job. The rest of the time, with the CPR, it was around the clock, because these boats ran steady. And the only time we ever saw your grandfather, when he was working for the CPR, every week, Nan would go down with his clean laundry and pick up his dirty laundry once a week, and we'd go down with her and meet him on the dock. He'd come off the ship, talk for a couple of minutes, and go right back on the ship again. And then when when they had the maintenance, did the maintenance, which was usually in the winter, he got off for, he was home at night for a couple of days. Even at Christmas time, he'd come home, he'd be lucky if he got off. He was able to get, if his watch coincided, if he was off watch when when the boat was in, he could get off for a short time. And I can remember Christmas. Nan would go big on Christmas. Dad would come home from the boat, get a taxi home, have Christmas dinner, open the presents and do the thing and head back. And that's the way it was. So he wanted some sort of a job where he could get around to realizing he had a family. So he started looking for a job on the coast, the coastal ships, and he got a job on the Grainer, and he worked on the Grainer as a chief engineer. Now you have to understand, here's something too. He has both his stationary, 4th class stationary and 4th class steam engineer papers for Marine and he did that with a 4th grade education. Oh, there's another, I'm going right back now to where he met Nan, or around the time he met Nan. There was a job advertised in the paper for a cold storage operator for Prince Rupert. So he applied for it. He didn't know diddle about refrigeration or cold storage or anything. So he applied for it anyhow, figuring it was a short job. Went to the library and got himself a bunch of literature on refrigeration and the rest of it. Before he got off the boat at Prince Rupert, he was able to operate he was a smart guy. Yeah. Anyhow, where are we? Anyhow, so that's going backwards again. You're going to have, that's the dockyard. But anyhow, he went to work on the Grainer. This is it. He went to work on the Grainer. That was in 1929. And he worked on the Grainer as chief engineer, and then he went back as second engineer. But this 1929 was when we had when the stock markets crashed. Mm-hmm. And when he quit, he didn't quit. Well, he did quit because we were living in Victoria when he went to work on the Grainer, but this company was located in Vancouver. They're where they tied up. Mm-hmm. And what it was just a small coastal freighter that packed grain and hay and concrete from Bamberton and hay up to Ladner and up to Fraser, and it was operated by this Butler Freighting and Towing, but they did the job for Brackman and Kerr Milling Company, and they were a big, like Buckerfields, and that's what they did. They packed hay and so on, and then when they it was a situation where they were spending more time, and the boat was tied up more in Vancouver than it was in Victoria, so we decided to move to Vancouver. That was in 1926. That's when he finished there, in 1926. And we lived in Victoria till 1928.
Vancouver, you mean?
Pardon?
Vancouver, you mean, or Victoria?
No, we lived in Vancouver until 1928.
Yeah.
And then we decided to move back to, well, we came to Victoria for a holiday, and all us kids, well, Ernie, all our friends were still here, and all Nan's friends were here, and what have you. So we came to Victoria on a holiday, and just about the time we were going home, going back to Vancouver, Nan said, would you like to live in Victoria again? Sure would, because we spent the 2 weeks with all the gang and we were having fun. So we moved back to Victoria. Still worked for the grainer, and then when in this era, in 29 the stock market crashed and the economy was down, and so they'd work when the boat had the job to work on. If the boat had to do any freight hauling, and then if it wasn't, they'd tie it up. So finally, in '32, the Depression really hit, and so it was tied up permanently. So then he came back to Victoria, or he's now in Victoria, and we're on relief. And I don't know whether you want to go into those gory details, but there was it. And finally, I'm going to go and check your plumbing. Finally, I'll talk when I come back, but keep my place, will you? We're in the Depression. You're interested?
Yeah.
And of course, the Depression was got 2 teenage kids, and they're scratching a living out of whatever. And then he started working when there was a job with the Island Titan Barge on a ship called the Antiochs. No, it was the first ship, the first boat he was on, first tug he was on, was a boat called the Salvage Queen, which had previously been a CPR coastal freighter called the Tees, and you'll see that in that book there. But it was a Salvage Queen, and then they got another one called the Antiochs, great big old clunker, and he worked on the Antiochs to get a couple of days here and a couple of days there, and then the Depression started to get better. I mean, the Depression started to get over in the early 30s or 35, around 34, 35, and he worked as an engineer on all these things, and then he worked in the Burrard Chief and the Sudbury. No, not the Sudbury, the Snohomish. And then the war broke out, and he got his shore job. Was station engineer at the VMD, operating the compressors, and that's when it ended in 1947. He wound up. He packed it up. He died. 47, came home from work at midnight, and he was dead before 5 o'clock in the morning. He had a stroke. But anyhow, that's your grandfather. Now, do you want me to talk about me? No.
Next term.
No.
I'll give you a break about that. I probably will. Next term.
Yeah, no, but if there's, is there
talking
anything?
I was telling Darity, like, it's funny you mentioned it, cause I was talking to Darity and I said, gee, I said, your dad, I said, Victoria like the back of your hand. Cause I know just from all the years of sitting, listening to,
Yeah.
and I said, it'd be really neat. I said, if you're taking, like the period of history that Darity has to cover right now as sort of your, Darity's grandfather's or your father's period. But then later on, Darity will be taking more history. It'll be slightly later. And I said, it'd be really interesting to do,
Well, there's one thing about it. I know a lot about Victoria and a lot about.
Well, you do.
Well, I
Amazing.
mean,
It amazes me just that you can remember it so clearly, because, heck, I grew up in Victoria and I don't know how.
Well, you see, I don't know what it is, whether I retain. Let's put it this way. I've wondered. I have quite a vivid memory for a lot of things, and I'll bet you there's lots of things I've missed out here. Not because but I can only think about a mile a minute. I mean half a mile a minute. But I have fairly good retention because I had to remember things that just didn't come that easy. Put this one here and that one there. So now, instead of just doing it automatically, you have to think about it. And I have no problem with anything. And I know I can, as far as Dad's concerned, your grandfather, he used to have reams and reams of stories. These are only, just skimming the surface of what, but of what I can remember, but if you have anything you want to, any questions you want to ask that might be pertinent to your assignment, you just.
Yeah, we'll go through the tape and see where might need some more information.
Oh God, you're not going to listen to that all again.
Yeah, transcribe it all. Boy. I'm gonna have to listen to me, and I hate that.
For me?
I said we'll have to listen to my voice, and I hate hearing my voice on the tape.
In fact, I was at when we were thinking about a boat. We were up visiting Mary and Bill, and Bill got talking boats, we got talking boats, and I got talking boats, and I think we've still got the tape at home. Doesn't sound a damn bit like I think I sound, and Mom taped the damn thing, or most of it, anyhow. God.
It's always kind of a shock when you hear yourself.
Yeah.
All you have to do is phone my number at work and listen to me on the tape.
Well,
That's really interesting, though.